The words hit me like a physical blow as I sat in our kitchen on that cold November morning. My husband Derek pushed a manila envelope across our breakfast table with the same casual indifference he might use to pass the salt. His face was stone cold, devoid of any emotion, as he delivered what felt like a death sentence to our 12-year marriage. "I want a divorce, Sarah," he said, not even bothering to look me in the eye. "And I want the house. You might as well not fight it. We both know you can't afford a lawyer good enough to go up against mine." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was the man I'd built a life with, the man whose dreams I'd supported when he was struggling to get his construction business off the ground. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear how it all unfolds, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me bring you more incredible stories of people fighting back against impossible odds. Give this video a thumbs up if you're already rooting for Sarah. And don't forget to share it with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the underdog has more fight than anyone expects. I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling as I processed his demands. Derek had transformed from the loving partner I once knew into someone I barely recognized, cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. He'd clearly been planning this ambush for months, maybe even years. Everything about this moment felt orchestrated, from the timing to his lawyer's aggressive demands tucked inside that envelope. 12 years, Derek," I whispered, my voice barely audible. 12 years I stood by you when your business was failing. I worked double shifts at the hospital to keep us afloat when you couldn't pay your workers. I believed in you when nobody else would." My throat constricted with emotion, but Derek's expression remained unchanged. He stood up from the table, straightening his expensive suit, one of many he'd acquired since his business finally took off 2 years ago. "That's ancient history, Sarah. Things change. People change. I've outgrown this life, and frankly, I've outgrown you." The words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Derek reached for his briefcase, the same one I'd given him for his birthday 3 years ago when he landed his first major commercial contract. "My attorney is Benjamin Crawford. You might have heard of him. He's the best divorce lawyer in the state, and he doesn't lose. Your nurse's salary might be respectable, Sarah, but it's not going to buy you the kind of legal representation you'd need to challenge me." I watched him move around our kitchen in the house we had renovated together with our own hands during the early years of our marriage. Every tile, every cabinet, every light fixture held memories of late nights working side by side, dreaming of our future together. Now he was treating it all like assets to be divided, like pieces on a chessboard. "The house alone is worth $800,000 now," Derek continued, his tone purely business. "My business has assets exceeding $2 million. I've got retirement accounts, investment properties, and connections you couldn't even imagine. What do you have, Sarah? A modest 401k and a 14-year-old Honda?" His laugh was cold and calculating. I felt something inside me break, but it wasn't my spirit. It was the last remaining thread of respect I had for the man I'd married. He saw me as weak, as someone who would simply roll over and let him take everything. In his mind, I was just another obstacle to clear on his path to whatever new life he'd envisioned for himself. Derek paused at the kitchen doorway, his hand resting on the frame. "I'm not trying to be cruel, Sarah. I'm trying to be realistic. You're a good person, and you deserve to move on with your life without dragging this through a long, expensive court battle you can't win. Sign the papers, take what I'm offering, and we can both start fresh." What he was offering was laughable. A small settlement that wouldn't even cover a decent apartment for more than a year, while he kept the house, the business, and virtually everything else we'd built together. It was an insult wrapped in false compassion, designed to make his robbery seem like mercy. As I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The legal documents inside were dense and intimidating, filled with language I didn't understand. But I understood enough to see that Derek intended to leave me with almost nothing while walking away with everything of value. What Derek didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that his greatest miscalculation wasn't underestimating my financial resources. It was underestimating my family. Specifically, it was underestimating my sister Elena, whom I hadn't spoken to in 3 years after a bitter falling out over our father's estate. Elena wasn't just any lawyer. She was a legal shark who specialized in complex divorce cases and had built a reputation for destroying opponents who underestimated her clients. She was also someone who held grudges and never forgot when someone hurt her family. Derek thought he'd cornered a helpless prey. He had no idea he'd just awakened a sleeping dragon. For 3 days after Derek delivered his ultimatum, I walked through my life like a ghost. I went through the motions at the hospital, caring for patients and maintaining my professional demeanor, but inside I felt hollow. Every night I came home to our house, a house that might not be mine much longer, and stared at those legal papers spread across the kitchen table. Derek had moved out immediately, claiming he was staying at a friend's place while we sorted things out. I knew better. In the past 6 months, he'd been working late more often, taking mysterious phone calls in the other room, and treating me with an increasing distance that now made perfect sense. There was undoubtedly another woman, someone who fit better into his newly elevated lifestyle. The house felt enormous and empty without him, but also strangely peaceful. I could think clearly, for the first time in months, without Derek's constant subtle criticisms and dismissive comments undermining my confidence. As I sat in my favorite chair on Thursday evening, reviewing my finances for the 100th time, reality crashed down on me like a tidal wave. Derek was right about one thing. I couldn't afford to fight him, at least not on his terms. Benjamin Crawford's retainer alone would consume my entire savings account, and that would just be the beginning. A prolonged legal battle could bankrupt me even if I won, which seemed unlikely given Crawford's reputation for demolishing unprepared opponents. I found myself staring at my phone, my thumb hovering over Elena's contact information. My sister's name had been sitting in my contacts for 3 years, unused, but never deleted. The thought of calling her made my stomach churn with a mixture of desperation and wounded pride. Our falling out had been spectacular and painful. When our father died, he'd left behind a modest estate and a will that, frankly, made little sense. Elena, as the executor, had made decisions I disagreed with. I'd accused her of being cold and calculating, putting legal technicalities above family sentiment. She'd accused me of being naive and emotional, unable to accept reality. We'd said things to each other that sisters should never say. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now in a situation where being cold and calculating might be exactly what I needed. Elena Martinez wasn't just any divorce attorney. She was a specialist in high-stakes family law who'd built her practice on cases where significant assets were involved. She'd represented celebrities, business executives, and politicians in some of the most complex and contentious divorces in the state. Her track record was legendary. She hadn't lost a major case in over 5 years. More importantly, she was ruthless in a way that I'd never fully appreciated until now. What I'd once seen as her inability to show warmth and emotion, I now realized was her greatest professional strength. She could compartmentalize personal feelings and focus entirely on winning, something I'd never been able to do. But calling her would mean admitting I needed help, swallowing my pride, and potentially reopening wounds that had never properly healed. It would also mean explaining how I'd ended up in this position, married to a man who was now trying to rob me blind. On Friday morning, I made my decision. I couldn't afford not to call her. My hands were shaking as I dialed her office number. Elena had always been a workaholic, and I figured reaching her at her law firm would be more professional, less personal than calling her cell phone. Martinez and Associates, this is Jennifer, came the crisp voice of what was obviously a well-trained receptionist. I need to speak with Elena Martinez, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This is Sarah Collins. I'm her sister. There was a pause. 1 moment, please. The hold music seemed to last forever. I almost hung up twice, my finger hovering over the end call button. Then Elena's voice came through the line, and suddenly it was like no time had passed at all. Sarah? She sounded genuinely surprised. What's wrong? Despite everything that had happened between us, despite 3 years of silence and hurt feelings, Elena's first instinct was still to ask what was wrong. Something in her tone, concern mixed with wariness, told me she already suspected this wasn't a social call. I need your help, I said simply. There was no point in beating around the bush with Elena. She'd always appreciated direct communication, even when we were kids. Are you in trouble? Are you safe? The questions came rapid fire, and I could hear her shifting into protective big sister mode, despite our estrangement. I'm safe, I assured her quickly. But Derek is divorcing me, and he's trying to take everything. He says I can't afford a lawyer good enough to fight his attorney. I took a deep breath. His lawyer is Benjamin Crawford. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Elena spoke, and her voice had changed completely. It was colder, sharper, and filled with something that sounded almost like anticipation. Benjamin Crawford, she repeated slowly. Well, that's interesting. Ben and I have a history. I didn't know what that meant, but something in Elena's tone made me think it wasn't a friendly history. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Elena continued. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything. Don't even talk to Derek or his lawyer until we've had a chance to meet. Can you do that? Yes, I said, relief flooding through me. But Elena, I should tell you up front. I can't afford your usual rates. I've looked up your firm online, and your retainer alone is more than I make in 6 months. Elena's laugh was sharp and humorless. Don't worry about money right now. This just became personal. Benjamin Crawford made a mistake when he decided to go after my little sister. He's about to learn that some fights aren't worth picking. Elena, I don't understand. You will, she interrupted. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow morning? Say, 9 o'clock? Bring every financial document you can find. Bank statements, tax returns, anything related to Derek's business. Property deeds, insurance policies, everything. I'll be there, I promised. Sarah? Elena's voice softened slightly. I know things between us have been complicated, but family is family. Derek picked the wrong woman to mess with, and Crawford is about to remember why he spent the last 2 years avoiding cases against me. After we hung up, I sat in my empty kitchen feeling something I hadn't experienced in days. Hope. Derek thought he held all the cards, that his money and connections made him untouchable. He had no idea that his wife's estranged sister was about to become his worst nightmare. I spent the rest of the evening gathering documents, and for the first time since Derek had delivered his ultimatum, I found myself smiling. He'd made one critical error in his calculations. He'd assumed I was alone and defenseless. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. Saturday morning came with a gray sky and drizzling rain that matched my anxious mood perfectly. I stood outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Martinez and Associates, clutching a banker's box full of documents and trying to work up the courage to go inside. The building was intimidating, all polished marble and expensive art, a far cry from the modest law office where Elena had started her career 15 years ago. I hadn't seen my sister in 3 years, not since that terrible day when we'd screamed at each other in the parking lot of the funeral home after Dad's service. The memory still stung. Elena telling me I was living in a fantasy world if I thought we could keep Dad's house as some kind of shrine, me calling her heartless and accusing her of caring more about money than family memories. Now here I was, about to walk into her world and ask for the very qualities I'd once condemned her for possessing. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt eternal. Elena's firm occupied the entire floor, with her name prominently displayed in elegant gold lettering. The receptionist, the same Jennifer I'd spoken to yesterday, led me through a maze of offices and conference rooms to Elena's corner suite. The door opened, and there she was. Elena looked exactly the same, yet completely different. She was still petite like me, but her presence filled the room, in a way I remembered from our childhood. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. But her eyes, our mother's eyes, softened when she saw me. Sarah. She stood up from behind a desk that could have doubled as a small aircraft carrier, and for a moment, we just looked at each other across 3 years of silence and hurt feelings. Then Elena stepped around the desk and, to my complete surprise, pulled me into a fierce hug. I've missed you, she whispered, and I felt tears threatening to spill over. I've missed you too, I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. Elena, I'm so sorry about. Later, she said firmly, pulling back and gesturing to the conference table by the windows. Right now, We have work to do. You can tell me everything while I review your documents." For the next 2 hours, I laid out the entire sorry saga of my marriage's collapse, while Elena methodically went through every piece of paper I'd brought. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer commentary, just listened and took notes with the focused intensity I remembered from when we were kids, and she'd help me with my homework. As I talked, I watched Elena's expression grow darker. When I described Derek's transformation from struggling contractor to successful businessman, she made several sharp notes. When I explained how he'd become increasingly distant and critical over the past year, her jaw tightened. And when I repeated his parting words about not being able to afford a lawyer good enough to fight Benjamin Crawford, Elena's eyes flashed with something that looked dangerously close to rage. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Elena said when I finished. "Derek built his construction business using your income to stay afloat during the early years. You worked overtime shifts, took on extra responsibilities, and essentially subsidized his dreams while putting your own goals on hold." "I wouldn't put it that way." I started, but Elena held up a hand. "I would. That's exactly what happened. And now that he's successful, using the foundation you helped provide, he wants to walk away with everything while leaving you with barely enough to survive." Elena's voice was clinical, but I could hear the anger simmering underneath. He's also clearly been planning this for some time, given how prepared he was with demands and legal representation. "That's about the size of it," I admitted. "Elena, I know I made mistakes. I should have paid more attention to our finances, should have insisted on being more involved in the business decisions. I trusted him completely, and now..." "Now nothing," Elena interrupted sharply. "You didn't make mistakes, Sarah. You were a good wife who supported her husband's dreams. Derek is the one who chose to repay that loyalty with betrayal." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "Tell me about Benjamin Crawford." "I don't know much beyond what Derek told me. He's supposed to be the best divorce attorney in the state. Very expensive. Doesn't lose cases." Elena turned back to me, and there was something in her expression that made me sit up straighter. "Ben Crawford and I were law school classmates. We dated for 2 years, actually. He broke up with me right before graduation because he said I was too aggressive and would never attract the right kind of clients with my attitude." My eyes widened. "Oh." Ben built his reputation representing wealthy men who wanted to keep their assets away from their wives. He's good at what he does, but he has 2 major weaknesses. He's arrogant, and he underestimates women. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. "He's about to be reminded why breaking up with me was the stupidest decision of his career." Elena returned to the conference table and began pulling out files from her own briefcase. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to file a motion for temporary spousal support and exclusive use of the marital home while the divorce is pending. Derek can't just kick you out and force you to fend for yourself. But can we win that? I mean, if his lawyer is as good as he says..." "Sarah, let me explain something about divorce law in this state. The court's priority is ensuring that both parties can maintain a reasonable standard of living during the proceedings. Derek makes significantly more money than you do, and you have a legitimate claim to temporary support. Any competent judge will grant that motion." Elena pulled out another file. "Second, we're going to demand full financial disclosure. Derek seems to think he can hide behind his business structures and complex finances, but I specialize in forensic accounting. We're going to examine every transaction, every contract, every penny that's moved through his accounts for the past 5 years." "5 years?" I asked, surprised by the time frame. If Derek has been planning this divorce, he may have been moving or hiding assets for years. Men like your husband often start positioning themselves financially long before they file for divorce. We need to see the full picture." Elena's expression was grim. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you have any reason to believe Derek has been unfaithful?" The question hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been suspecting it myself. Maybe, probably. He's been working late constantly, taking calls he won't explain, and he's been treating me like I'm some kind of burden for months. Have you noticed any unusual expenses? Gifts you didn't receive, restaurant charges for amounts that would feed more than one person, hotel stays that weren't business-related? I thought about it, combing through my memories of reviewing our credit card statements over the past year. There were some charges I questioned. Derek said they were all business-related, but some of them seemed personal. A hourly store charge for almost $3,000 that he said was a client gift, several expensive restaurant bills, some hotel charges in the city when I thought he was supposed to be working local jobs. Elena made more notes. If Derek has been having an affair and using marital assets to fund it, that's going to significantly impact how the court views this case. Adultery might not affect the divorce itself in this state, but spending community property on an extramarital relationship absolutely will affect asset division. For the first time since Derek had dropped his bombshell, I began to feel something other than fear and desperation. Elena wasn't just confident, she was excited. This wasn't just a legal case for her, it was personal. "Elena, there's something else you should know," I said hesitantly. Derek made a point of mentioning his net worth, the business assets, investment properties, retirement accounts. He seemed to want me to know exactly how much I'd be giving up by fighting him. Elena's laugh was cold. He overplayed his hand. By bragging about his wealth, he just confirmed that there are significant assets at stake. That makes this a high-asset divorce case, which happens to be my specialty. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with determination. "Sarah, I want you to understand something. Derek chose to threaten my sister, and Benjamin Crawford chose to take a case against me. This isn't just about your divorce anymore. This is about sending a message." "What kind of message?" "That you don't mess with the Martinez women. Derek is about to learn that the biggest mistake of his life wasn't just leaving you, it was underestimating what you're capable of when you have the right support." As I left Elena's office that afternoon, I felt transformed. Derek had seen me as weak and isolated, someone who would simply accept whatever scraps he chose to throw me. He had no idea that his greatest miscalculation had just brought the most dangerous divorce attorney in the state into his life, and that she had very personal reasons to destroy him. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me feel optimistic about new beginnings. Today, however, it felt more like the calm before a storm. Elena had warned me that Derek and his attorney would likely try to rush the initial proceedings, hoping to catch me unprepared and overwhelmed. What they didn't know was that I was no longer the isolated, frightened woman Derek had left behind just 5 days ago. I was getting ready for work when my doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw a young man in a cheap suit holding an official-looking envelope. "Process server." Elena had prepared me for this moment. "Sarah Collins?" he asked when I opened the door. "Yes. You're being served with divorce papers and a motion for immediate asset protection. Have a good day, ma'am." I took the thick envelope with steady hands, thanked him politely, and closed the door. Then I immediately called Elena, as she'd instructed me to do the moment I was formally served. "They moved faster than I expected," Elena said after I read her the key points from Derek's filing. "Ben's trying to get an emergency hearing to freeze all marital assets and establish temporary arrangements before we can respond. It's a classic intimidation tactic." "What does that mean for me?" "It means they're scared," Elena said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Derek obviously told Crawford that you wouldn't fight back, and now Crawford's worried that he might have misjudged the situation. The fact that they're rushing to court tells me they want to lock you into an unfavorable arrangement before you can mount a proper defense." Elena paused, and I heard papers shuffling in the background. "Here's what's going to happen. I've already prepared our counter motions, and I filed them with the court an hour ago. We're not just responding to their requests, we're going on the offensive." "What kind of counter motions?" "Temporary spousal support, exclusive use of the marital home, and, here's the important part, an emergency motion for full financial disclosure and forensic accounting of all business assets for the past 5 years. Elena's voice took on a predatory edge. Derek wanted to play hardball. He's about to find out what that actually looks like. That afternoon, I left work early to meet Elena at the courthouse for the emergency hearing. As we walked through the marble corridors, Elena briefed me on what to expect. "Crawford will try to paint you as vindictive and unreasonable," she explained. He'll argue that Derek is being generous with his settlement offer, and that you're just being greedy by demanding more. Let him talk. Every word he says gives me more ammunition. We entered the courtroom, and I immediately spotted Derek sitting at the plaintiff's table. He looked confident and expensive in a navy suit I'd never seen before, clearly purchased for this occasion. Next to him sat Benjamin Crawford, and I had to admit he was impressive. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that probably intimidated most opponents. Crawford's expression changed the moment he saw Elena walk in. The confident smile faltered, replaced by something that looked like genuine concern. Elena, meanwhile, moved with the fluid grace of a predator approaching prey. "Ben," she said pleasantly as we took our seats. "It's been a while." "Elena," Crawford replied stiffly. "I wasn't aware you were representing Mrs. Collins." "There are a lot of things you're not aware of yet," Elena replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But you will be." Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom, and I immediately felt more optimistic. Elena had mentioned that Judge Hendricks had a reputation for being tough on attorneys who tried to rush proceedings or take advantage of unrepresented parties. Crawford stood first, launching into what was clearly a well-rehearsed speech about Derek's generous settlement offer and the need to protect business assets from emotional vindictiveness. He painted a picture of Derek as a successful businessman who was trying to do right by his wife, while portraying me as someone who was being unreasonable and destructive. "Your Honor," Crawford concluded, "Mr. Collins has offered Mrs. Collins a fair settlement that will allow her to maintain her lifestyle while protecting the business interests that provide employment for dozens of families. We ask the court to approve these arrangements and prevent any actions that might jeopardize these legitimate business concerns." Crawford was good. I had to give him that. His presentation was smooth, professional, and designed to make Derek look like the reasonable party. But I noticed that he was careful not to make any specific claims about Derek's behavior or the circumstances surrounding the divorce request. Then Elena stood up, and the entire atmosphere in the room changed. "Your Honor, I appreciate opposing counsel's creative interpretation of the facts, but let's discuss what's actually happening here." Elena's voice was calm but carried an authority that immediately commanded attention. Mr. Collins built his construction business using Mrs. Collins' income during the struggling early years. She worked overtime shifts as a registered nurse, often pulling double duty to keep their household afloat while Mr. Collins established his company. Elena moved closer to the judge's bench, carrying a thick file folder. Now that the business is successful, largely due to Mrs. Collins' financial sacrifices, Mr. Collins wants to walk away with everything while leaving his wife of 12 years with a settlement that wouldn't cover her living expenses for 18 months. Judge Hendricks looked interested. "Continue, counselor." "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence suggesting that Mr. Collins has been planning this divorce for some time and may have been moving or hiding assets in preparation. Mrs. Collins has identified numerous questionable expenditures over the past 2 years. Expensive gifts she never received, restaurant bills for amounts that would serve multiple people, hotel charges that don't correspond to any legitimate business activities." I watched Derek's face as Elena spoke and saw the first crack in his confident facade. His jaw tightened, and he leaned over to whisper something urgently to Crawford. Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "Your Honor, this appears to be a case where one spouse has used marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship, while simultaneously positioning himself to exclude his wife from the business success she helped create. We're asking the court to grant temporary spousal support, award Mrs. Collins exclusive use of the marital home, and order complete financial disclosure including forensic accounting of all business transactions for the past 5 years. Crawford jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, these are completely unfounded allegations designed to—" "Mr. Crawford," Judge Hendricks interrupted sharply, "you'll have your chance to respond. Ms. Martinez, what evidence do you have to support these claims?" Elena opened her folder and began pulling out documents. Bank statements showing unusual spending patterns, credit card charges that don't correspond to known family activities, and Mrs. Collins' employment records showing the overtime income that supported the business during its early years. She handed the documents to the bailiff. We believe a forensic accounting will reveal systematic asset manipulation designed to minimize Mrs. Collins' legitimate claims. Judge Hendricks reviewed the documents for several minutes while the courtroom remained silent. I could feel Derek's eyes on me, but I kept my gaze focused straight ahead. When the judge finally looked up, her expression was stern. "Mr. Crawford, your client's settlement offer appears to be based on a significant undervaluation of marital assets and Mrs. Collins' contributions to the marriage. I'm granting the motion for temporary spousal support in the amount of $4,000 per month, effective immediately." Derek's face went white. Crawford started to object, but Judge Hendricks held up a hand. "I'm also awarding Mrs. Collins exclusive use of the marital home during these proceedings. Mr. Collins will need to find alternative housing arrangements." The judge looked directly at Derek. "And given the questions raised about asset disclosure, I'm ordering complete financial transparency. Mr. Collins will provide 5 years of business records, personal financial statements, and account documentation to be reviewed by a court-appointed forensic accountant." Crawford was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is an unprecedented intrusion into—" "Mr. Crawford," Judge Hendricks said coldly, "if your client has nothing to hide, then transparency shouldn't be a problem. The forensic accounting will either confirm his claims or reveal any irregularities. Either way, this court will have the complete picture before making any final determinations." As we left the courthouse, I felt like I was walking on air. In less than an hour, Elena had completely reversed Derek's strategy. Instead of the quick, one-sided victory he'd expected, he was now facing months of financial scrutiny and paying me substantial temporary support. "That went better than I hoped," Elena said as we reached her car. "Did you see Crawford's face when Judge Hendricks mentioned forensic accounting? He knows what we're going to find." "What happens now?" "Now Derek learns that divorcing you was the second biggest mistake of his life," Elena replied with a satisfied smile. "The biggest mistake was hiring Benjamin Crawford to fight me. He just gave me everything I need to destroy him." As I drove home to my house, the house Derek could no longer enter without permission, I realized that, for the first time in months, I felt powerful. Derek had tried to crush me, but instead he'd awakened something in both me and Elena that he was completely unprepared to handle. The real battle was just beginning. The weeks following our courthouse victory were a whirlwind of discovery, depositions, and revelations that peeled back the layers of Derek's deception like an onion. Elena had connected me with Dr. Patricia Wong, the forensic accountant the court had appointed, and what she found in Derek's financial records was both infuriating and enlightening. "Your sister wasn't exaggerating when she said this was her specialty," Dr. Wong told me during our second meeting at her downtown office. Spread across her conference table were printouts, charts, and financial documents that painted a picture of systematic financial manipulation that had been going on for nearly 2 years. Dr. Wong pointed to a series of highlighted entries on Derek's business account statements. Starting in January of last year, we see a pattern of unusual cash withdrawals and transfers that don't correspond to any legitimate business expenses. Small amounts initially, $500 here, $1,000 there, but escalating significantly over time. I leaned forward, studying the documents. What were these payments for? That's what we needed to find out. Cross-referencing with credit card statements and other records, we discovered that these cash withdrawals corresponded almost exactly with a series of expensive purchases and activities. Dr. Wong pulled out another folder. Jewelry purchases totaling over $8,000. Jewelry that you've confirmed you never received. High-end restaurant bills. Always for 2 people. At times when you were working at the hospital. Weekend getaway packages to luxury resorts. The evidence was damning, but Dr. Wong wasn't finished. The most significant discovery came when we subpoenaed records from Pemberton Industries, one of Derek's biggest clients. It turns out that Derek's company has been billing them for a marketing consultant named Victoria Sterling at a rate of $3,000 per month for the past 18 months. "Who is Victoria Sterling?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. That's where it gets interesting. Victoria Sterling is 28 years old, recently divorced, and works as an interior designer. She has no background in construction or industrial marketing. but she does have a very close personal relationship with your husband. Elena, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. How close? Dr. Wong pulled out a final folder, this one marked, Confidential Investigation Results. Close enough that Derek purchased her a luxury apartment in the Marina District 6 months ago. The lease is in Victoria's name, but Derek's company is listed as the guarantor. He's also been making payments on her car lease, her health insurance, and providing her with a monthly consulting fee that she's been spending on personal expenses. I felt sick to my stomach. Derek hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been systematically using our marital assets to set up house with another woman while lying to my face about working late and building his business. How much money are we talking about? Elena asked. Over the past 18 months, approximately $230,000 in marital assets have been diverted to support this relationship. Dr. Wong replied matter-of-factly. And that's just what we can document. There may be additional cash transactions or other arrangements we haven't uncovered yet. Elena was making notes furiously. Patricia, this is incredible work. Can you have a formal report ready by Friday? I'll have it to you by Thursday morning, Dr. Wong replied. But there's one more thing you should know. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen someone so careless about hiding their tracks. It's almost like Derek wanted to get caught, or he was so confident that Sarah wouldn't fight back that he didn't bother to cover his activities properly. After we left Dr. Wong's office, Elena and I sat in her car in the parking garage, both processing what we'd just learned. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and betrayal. Vindication that my suspicions had been correct, but betrayal that went deeper than I'd ever imagined. Sarah, I know this is hard to hear, Elena said gently, but this evidence changes everything. Derek didn't just commit adultery, he committed financial fraud. He stole marital assets to fund his relationship with Victoria Sterling. What does that mean for the divorce? It means we've moved from asset division to asset recovery. Derek doesn't just lose his claim to a larger share of marital property. He's going to have to pay back every penny he spent on his girlfriend, plus interest, plus penalties. Elena's expression was grim. And Benjamin Crawford knows it. He's going to try to settle this case before we can present this evidence in open court. Elena was right. 2 days later, Crawford called requesting an emergency settlement conference. Derek, who had been so confident just weeks ago, was now desperate to avoid the public humiliation of having his financial misconduct exposed in detail during a trial. The settlement conference was held in a neutral conference room at the courthouse with a mediator present to facilitate discussions. Derek looked haggard and nervous, a far cry from the smug, confident man who had delivered his ultimatum in our kitchen. Crawford, meanwhile, appeared to be going through the motions, clearly aware that his client's position was hopeless. My client is prepared to be reasonable, Crawford began, though his heart clearly wasn't in it. Mr. Collins recognizes that emotions have been running high, and he's willing to adjust his initial settlement offer to reflect Mrs. Collins' concerns. Elena opened her briefcase and placed Dr. Wong's report on the conference table with a decisive thud. Before we discuss any settlement offers, I think everyone should review the forensic accounting report. Crawford's face went pale as he scanned the executive summary. Derek didn't even try to read it. He just stared at the table, his hands clenched into fists. As you can see, Elena continued conversationally, Mr. Collins has systematically diverted approximately $230,000 in marital assets to fund his extramarital relationship. He purchased an apartment for his girlfriend, pays her living expenses, and has been billing her as a fake employee to his business clients. The mediator, Judge Robert Chen, looked up from the report with obvious surprise. Mr. Crawford, how does your client respond to these allegations? Crawford cleared his throat. Your Honor, while there may have been some irregular expenditures, my client maintains that. Your client maintains nothing, Elena interrupted smoothly. These aren't allegations. They're documented facts supported by bank records, credit card statements, lease agreements, and business records. Mr. Collins committed fraud, and now he needs to face the consequences. Derek finally looked up, his eyes desperate. Sarah, please, can we just talk about this privately? We don't need to air all our personal business in court. I looked at this man I had once loved, this man who had systematically betrayed and robbed me while making me feel like I was the problem in our marriage. No, Derek, You made your choice when you decided I was too weak to fight back. Now you get to live with the consequences." Elena placed a new document on the table. "Here are our settlement terms. Mr. Collins will relinquish all claims to the marital home. He will return the $230,000 he stole, plus 20% interest. Mrs. Collins will receive 70% of all remaining marital assets, including retirement accounts and business interests. Mr. Collins will also pay Mrs. Collins legal fees and continue spousal support for 3 years." Crawford looked like he might be sick. "These terms are completely unreasonable. You're asking for essentially everything." "I'm asking for justice," Elena replied calmly. "Your client gambled that my sister wouldn't fight back, and he lost. He can accept these terms, or we can go to trial and let a judge decide after hearing all the evidence in open court, including testimony from Victoria Sterling about exactly how Mr. Collins has been supporting her lifestyle with marital assets." Derek's head snapped up. "You can't drag Victoria into this. She didn't know." "She didn't know what, Derek?" I asked. "That you were married? That you were using my money to pay for her apartment?" I felt a surge of anger that surprised me with its intensity. "Or did you tell her I was just some obstacle you were planning to get rid of?" Judge Chen intervened. "I think everyone needs to take a breath and consider their options carefully. Mr. Crawford, you have 48 hours to respond to this settlement offer. If your client rejects it, this case will proceed to trial." As we left the conference room, Derek caught up with me in the hallway. "Sarah, please. I know I made mistakes, but destroying me won't make you happy." I turned to face him, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely calm. "Derek, you're right about one thing. Destroying you won't make me happy, but getting justice will. You tried to throw me away, like garbage, while stealing everything we built together. Now you're facing the consequences." "But what about all the good years we had? Doesn't that count for something?" I studied his face, looking for any trace of the man I had once loved. All I saw was desperation and self-pity. "The good years ended the moment you decided to betray me. Everything since then has been a lie." Elena appeared at my elbow. "Sarah, we should go." As we walked away, I heard Derek call after us. "This isn't over." Elena stopped and turned back to him with a smile that would have frozen hell itself. "You're absolutely right, Derek. It's not over. It's just getting started." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. Derek had tried to make me feel small and helpless, but instead he had awakened something fierce in both me and my sister. He was about to learn that sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is underestimating the person you're trying to destroy. The 48-hour deadline came and went without a word from Crawford or Derek. Elena wasn't surprised. She'd seen this pattern before with desperate clients who couldn't accept that their carefully constructed lives were crumbling around them. "They're going to try one last Hail Mary," Elena predicted as we sat in her office on Thursday morning. "Crawford's probably advising Derek to declare bankruptcy or claim business losses to avoid paying back the stolen assets." I was reviewing the final forensic accounting report when Elena's assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Martinez? Benjamin Crawford is here. He says it's urgent." Elena and I exchanged glances. Crawford entering Elena's territory was essentially an admission of defeat, but it also meant he was desperate enough to try something unpredictable. "Send him in," Elena said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a chess player who could see checkmate approaching. Crawford entered looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. "Elena, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "This situation has gotten completely out of hand." "Has it?" Elena replied coolly, not bothering to stand or offer him a seat. "From where I'm sitting, everything is proceeding exactly as expected. Your client committed fraud, and now he's facing the consequences." Crawford finally sat down uninvited, running his hands through his silver hair. "Look, I know you're still angry about law school, but this isn't about us. This is about two people whose lives are being destroyed by a vindictive legal process." Elena's laugh was sharp as glass. "Vindictive? Ben, your client stole over $200,000 from his wife to fund his affair. He tried to throw her away with nothing, while keeping everything they built together. The only vindictive person in this equation is Derek Collins. Derek made mistakes, Crawford admitted. But financial ruin isn't going to fix those mistakes. There has to be a middle ground here. I finally spoke up. There was a middle ground, Mr. Crawford. It was called not stealing from me to pay your girlfriend's rent. Derek chose a different path. Crawford turned to me with what I assumed was supposed to be a sympathetic expression. Mrs. Collins, I understand you're hurt and angry, but destroying Derek's business won't just hurt him. It'll put dozens of people out of work. His employees have families, mortgages, responsibilities. Do you really want to be responsible for that collateral damage? Elena stood up sharply. Don't you dare try to manipulate my sister with guilt about Derek's employees. If Derek cared about his workers, he wouldn't have jeopardized his business by committing fraud. But Crawford's words had hit their mark, and he could see it. I did feel a pang of guilt thinking about the construction workers and office staff who had nothing to do with Derek's betrayal. Elena must have sensed my wavering resolve, because she moved quickly to counter Crawford's psychological manipulation. Sarah, let me ask you something, Elena said, her voice gentle but firm. If Derek had come to you a year ago and said he wanted a divorce, would you have fought him? I considered the question honestly. No, I would have been heartbroken, but I wouldn't have tried to keep him if he wanted to leave. And if he had asked for a fair division of assets, acknowledging your contributions to his success, I would have accepted it. I never wanted to hurt Derek. I just wanted to be treated with respect. Elena turned back to Crawford. You see, Ben? This was never about revenge or vindictiveness. This is about justice. Derek didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to rob Sarah blind while making her feel like she was powerless to stop him. Every consequence he's facing now is a direct result of that choice. Crawford's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with obvious frustration. Derek's outside. He insisted on coming. Send him in, I said before Elena could object. I want to hear what he has to say. Derek entered the office looking worse than Crawford. The confident, successful businessman who had delivered his ultimatum just weeks ago was gone, replaced by a man who looked haunted and desperate. His eyes immediately found mine, and I saw something there I hadn't seen in years. Genuine remorse. Sarah, he said, his voice hoarse. I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. Which things, Derek? I asked calmly. The part where you stole my money to buy your girlfriend an apartment, or the part where you tried to convince me I was too weak to fight back? Derek flinched as if I'd slapped him. I know how it looks, but it wasn't like that. Victoria and it just happened. I didn't plan for it. You didn't plan to fall in love with her, or you didn't plan to get caught stealing from me to support her? Both. Neither. I don't know. Derek slumped into a chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. I was miserable, Sarah. We were both miserable. We'd been going through the motions for years, and when I met Victoria, I felt alive again for the first time in forever. Elena started to interrupt, but I held up a hand. For the first time in months, Derek was being honest with me, and I needed to hear it. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, Derek continued. I know I should have talked to you first. Should have been honest about wanting out of our marriage. But I was a coward. I was afraid of hurting you. Afraid of losing everything I'd worked for. Afraid of starting over. So instead, you decided to have your cake and eat it too. I said, keep me around to maintain appearances while using our money to set up your new life with Victoria. Derek's head dropped into his hands. Yes. And I told myself I was being smart, being strategic. I convinced myself that you'd be better off if you never knew about Victoria, if you could just move on with a clean break and some financial security. A clean break? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Derek, you tried to leave me with barely enough money to survive while you walked away with everything we built together. How is that a clean break? Because I hoped. Derek struggled to find the words. I thought if I could make it seem like you were getting a fair deal, you wouldn't look too closely at the details. I thought you'd accept what I offered and we could both move on. Elena couldn't stay silent any longer. In other words, you thought Sarah was stupid and weak enough to let you rob her blind. Derek's eyes flashed with anger. I never thought Sarah was stupid. I thought she was trusting. I thought she loved me enough to want what was best for both of us. And what was best for both of us involved me living in poverty while you and Victoria enjoyed the fruits of my labor, I asked. The fight went out of Derek as quickly as it had appeared. No, you're right, I was selfish and cruel and stupid. I destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too much of a coward to face my problems honestly. For a moment, the office was completely silent. Then Crawford cleared his throat. Derek wants to make this right, Sarah. He's prepared to accept responsibility for his actions and work out a fair settlement. Define fair, Elena said skeptically. Derek looked directly at me. I'll give you the house. I'll return every penny I spent on Victoria with interest. You can have half of everything else. The business, retirement accounts, everything. And I'll pay your legal fees. Elena and I exchanged glances. Derek's offer was significantly better than his original settlement proposal, but it still fell short of what we could win at trial. That's not enough, Elena said firmly. Not after what you put Sarah through. But I surprised everyone, including myself, by what I said next. I want to talk to Victoria Sterling. Derek's face went white. Sarah, no, please don't drag her into this. She doesn't deserve. She doesn't deserve what, Derek? To face the consequences of participating in the destruction of my marriage? To explain how she felt comfortable accepting gifts and support that she knew came from a married man's household income? Victoria didn't know about the financial details. Derek protested. She thought I was already separated, that the divorce was just a formality. Elena leaned forward. Is that what you told her? That you were separated? Derek's silence was answer enough. So you lied to both of us, I said quietly. You lied to me about working late and business expenses. And you lied to her about the status of our marriage. Does Victoria know that you used marital assets to pay for her apartment? Does she know that every gift you gave her was bought with money that belonged to both of us? Sarah, please, Derek begged. Victoria's been through enough. Her ex-husband was abusive, and she's just trying to rebuild her life. Don't punish her for my mistakes. Something about Derek's protective tone when he spoke about Victoria hit me harder than all his financial betrayals combined. He had never spoken about me with that kind of tender concern, not even in our early years together. Schedule the meeting, I told Elena. I want to hear Victoria's side of this story. Crawford looked panicked. That's completely unnecessary. We can work out a settlement without involving. No, I said firmly. Derek made choices that involved all three of us. Victoria benefits from those choices, and she's going to have to face the reality of where those benefits came from. If she's as innocent as Derek claims, then she shouldn't have any problem explaining her perspective. Elena smiled. I'll have Victoria Sterling subpoenaed for a deposition tomorrow. As Crawford and Derek prepared to leave, Derek turned back to me one last time. Sarah, I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, I did love you. I still do, in my way. I looked at this man who had shared my bed, my dreams, and my life for 12 years, and felt nothing but pity. No, Derek, you loved what I could do for you. There's a difference. After they left, Elena and I sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. Are you sure about this, Sarah? Meeting with Victoria could be emotionally difficult. I need to see her face when she learns the truth about where her comfortable lifestyle came from, I replied. And I need to know if she's a victim like Derek claims, or if she's been a willing participant in my destruction. Elena nodded. Either way, we'll get our answers tomorrow. As I drove home that evening, I realized that the frightened, devastated woman who had received Derek's ultimatum just a few weeks ago was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, someone who refused to be anyone's victim. Derek had intended to break me, but instead, he had forged me into something harder, and more resilient than he could have imagined. The real question was, what kind of woman would emerge from the fire he had started? Victoria Sterling was nothing like what I had expected. When she walked into the conference room at Elena's office the next morning, I was struck by how young and fragile she appeared. At 28, she had the kind of delicate beauty that made men want to protect her. Petite frame, blonde hair, wide blue eyes that seemed perpetually startled. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, but her hands were shaking as she clutched her small purse. Derek wasn't with her, which surprised me. I had expected him to hover protectively, but Elena had insisted that Victoria's deposition be conducted without Derek present. Crawford sat beside Victoria, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Elena had prepared me for this moment, but seeing Derek's mistress in person still felt surreal. This was the woman my husband had chosen over me, the woman he had spent my money to support, the woman who had unknowingly helped destroy my marriage. "Miss Sterling," Elena began formally, "thank you for coming. I know this situation is uncomfortable, but we need to establish some facts about your relationship with Derek Collins." Victoria's voice was barely audible when she spoke. "I understand. I want to help however I can." Elena activated the recording device on the table. "Let's start with the basics. When did you first meet Derek Collins?" 18 months ago, Victoria replied, her eyes focused on her hands. "He was doing a renovation on the building where my design studio was located. We started talking during his lunch breaks." "And when did your relationship become romantic?" Victoria's cheeks flushed pink. "About a month after we met. Derek told me he was going through a difficult divorce, that he and his wife had been separated for over a year, but were still working out the details." I felt a stab of anger at Derek's lie, but kept my expression neutral. Elena continued her questioning. "Did Derek ever mention that he was still living with his wife during this period?" Victoria looked up sharply. "No. He said they were living separately, that the marriage was over in everything but name." She glanced at me for the first time, her eyes filled with what looked like genuine distress. "He said you both wanted to keep things private until the legal proceedings were finalized." Elena made notes on her legal pad. "Tell me about your living arrangements. When did Derek help you find your current apartment?" "About 6 months after we started dating. My lease was up on my old place, and Derek said he knew about a beautiful apartment in the Marina District. He offered to help with the deposit because my divorce settlement was still being finalized and money was tight." "Did Derek explain how he was able to afford to guarantee your lease?" Victoria hesitated. "He said business was going very well. He told me he'd just landed several major commercial contracts and wanted to help me get back on my feet after my divorce." Elena pulled out a document from her folder. "Miss Sterling, I'm showing you a lease agreement for your current apartment. According to this document, Derek's construction company is listed as the guarantor, and they've been making monthly payments of $3,000 directly to the landlord. Were you aware of this arrangement?" Victoria's face went pale as she studied the document. "I thought Derek told me the landlord was a friend of his, who was giving me a special rate. I've been paying Derek $500 a month, and he said he was taking care of the rest as a loan until I got back on my feet financially." Elena and I exchanged glances. Victoria had been paying Derek $500 while he paid $3,000 to the landlord, a difference of $2,500 per month in rent alone. "What about other expenses?" Elena continued. "Car payments, insurance, living expenses?" "Derek helped with those too," Victoria admitted, her voice growing smaller. "He said it was temporary, just until my design business took off and my divorce was finalized. He was so generous, so caring. After what I went through with my ex-husband." She trailed off, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Elena's voice remained professional but not unkind. "Miss Sterling, I'm going to show you some financial documents. These are records of payments made by Derek's business account over the past 18 months. Elena spread out a series of bank statements and receipts across the table. "As you can see, the total amount Derek has spent on your housing, car payments, insurance, and personal expenses totals approximately $230,000. Victoria stared at the documents in shock. "That can't be right. Derek said he was lending me small amounts, just enough to help me get established. I had no idea." Were you aware that Derek was billing his business clients for your services as a marketing consultant? What? Victoria looked genuinely confused. I don't do marketing consulting. I'm an interior designer. Elena showed her another document. According to Derek's business records, he's been charging clients $3,000 per month for marketing consultation services provided by Victoria Sterling. The payments have been going directly into Derek's account, but he's been claiming them as legitimate business expenses. Victoria stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Are you telling me that Derek has been using me as some kind of fake employee to steal money from his clients? That appears to be exactly what happened, Elena confirmed. And the money he used to support you came from marital assets that legally belonged to both Derek and his wife. Victoria turned to look at me directly for the first time. Mrs. Collins, I swear to you, I had no idea. Derek told me you were separated, that the divorce was almost final, that supporting me temporarily was his choice to make. I studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of deception. What I saw was genuine shock and growing horror as she realized the extent of Derek's manipulation. I believe you, I said quietly, but I need you to understand something. While Derek was spending my money to support you, I was working overtime shifts at the hospital to keep our household running. While he was taking you on weekend getaways with marital funds, I was eating dinner alone, wondering why my husband seemed to hate me. Victoria sank back into her chair, tears now flowing freely. Oh God, I am so sorry. I never would have accepted his help if I had known. I thought I had finally found a good man who wanted to take care of me. Crawford, who had been silent throughout the deposition, finally spoke. I think we've established that Miss Sterling was unaware of the source of the funds. Elena nodded. That may be true, but awareness doesn't change the legal implications. Victoria benefited from assets that were obtained through fraud. Those benefits will need to be accounted for in any settlement agreement. Victoria looked panicked. What does that mean? Am I going to be charged with a crime? Not necessarily, Elena replied. But Derek will need to account for every penny he spent on you, and if he can't repay those amounts, you may be asked to return what you received. I don't have $230,000, Victoria whispered. I don't have any money. My design business barely breaks even, and everything I have came from Derek. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for this young woman who had become an unwitting pawn in Derek's selfish game. Victoria, can I ask you something? She nodded, wiping her eyes. In the time you've known Derek, has he ever mentioned feeling guilty about lying to his wife? Has he ever expressed any remorse about deceiving me? Victoria considered the question carefully. He said he felt bad about how things ended between you two. He said you were a good person who deserved better than the marriage you had together. But he also said that you both had grown apart, that staying together would just make both of you miserable. Did he ever mention that I was working extra shifts to support his business while he was spending that same money on you? Victoria's face crumpled. No, never. He said you had your own career and were financially independent. He made it sound like you wanted the divorce too. Elena leaned forward. Victoria, I want to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest. Now that you know the truth about where Derek's money came from, what do you want to do? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at the financial documents spread across the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite her tears. I want to make this right, she said. I don't know how, but I want to make this right. Mrs. Collins, I am genuinely sorry for my part in this, even though I didn't understand what was happening. She turned to Elena. What would happen if I testified against Derek? If I told the court everything he told me, all the lies he used to justify what he was doing? Crawford looked alarmed. Miss Sterling, I wouldn't advise. I'm not asking you, Victoria interrupted with sudden firmness. I'm asking Ms. Martinez. Derek lied to both of us, and I'm tired of being his victim. If my testimony can help Mrs. Collins get justice, then that's what I want to do. Elena smiled. Not her predatory courtroom smile, but something warmer. Victoria, your testimony could be very valuable. It would establish a pattern of deception and manipulation that goes to the heart of Derek's character. As the deposition concluded, Victoria approached me hesitantly. "Mrs. Collins, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I'm going to move out of the apartment immediately. And I'm going to return everything Derek gave me that I still have. The jewelry, the furniture, everything." "You don't have to do that," I said. "This isn't your fault." "Maybe not entirely," Victoria replied. "But I won't keep things that were bought with your money. It's not right." As Victoria left the conference room, Elena turned to me with satisfaction. "Sarah, we just gained the most powerful witness we could have asked for. Derek's own girlfriend is going to testify that he systematically lied about your marriage, your financial situation, and his legal right to spend marital assets on her." "I almost feel sorry for her," I admitted. "She's another one of Derek's victims." "She is," Elena agreed. "But she's also choosing to do the right thing now that she knows the truth. That takes courage." Crawford lingered as we packed up our materials. "Elena, surely we can work something out without dragging this through a public trial." "Derek is prepared to be reasonable." Elena's expression hardened. "Then, your client had multiple opportunities to be reasonable. He chose deception and theft instead. Now he gets to face the consequences in open court." As we left the building, I felt a strange sense of closure. Meeting Victoria had answered questions I didn't even know I had been carrying. Derek hadn't left me for someone better or more deserving. He had left me for someone he could manipulate and control more easily. The problem had never been my worth or my inadequacy. The problem had been Derek's character. "How do you feel?" Elena asked as we reached our cars.
"Powerful," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. For the first time in years, I feel powerful. Derek had tried to destroy me by making me feel weak and isolated. Instead, he had introduced me to my own strength and reconnected me with my sister. Victoria's testimony would be the final nail in his legal coffin. But more importantly, her honesty had freed me from any remaining doubt about my own worth. The scared, devastated woman who had sat in her kitchen receiving divorce papers was gone forever. In her place stood someone who would never again allow herself to be anyone's victim. Derek was about to learn that his greatest miscalculation hadn't been underestimating my resources or my legal representation. It had been underestimating the woman he had tried to throw away. 3 months later, I stood in the same courthouse where this battle had begun, but everything had changed. The frightened woman who had once trembled at the thought of facing Derek's expensive lawyer was gone. In her place stood someone who had discovered her own strength and refused to be anyone's victim. The trial had lasted 2 weeks, and it had been a masterclass in legal warfare. Elena had systematically demolished Derek's position, presenting evidence of his financial fraud, his systematic deception, and his calculated attempt to leave me with nothing. Victoria's testimony had been devastating. Her quiet, dignified recounting of Derek's lies had painted him as a manipulative predator who used vulnerable women for his own ends. Derek himself had been forced to take the stand, and watching him try to justify his actions under Elena's relentless cross-examination had been both satisfying and sad. The confident man who had once dismissed me as too weak to fight back had crumbled under the weight of his own contradictions and lies. Now Judge Hendricks was ready to deliver her final ruling, and the courtroom was packed. Word had spread through the legal community about the case. The nurse who had taken on the construction mogul and his high-powered attorney, represented by her estranged sister, in what had become one of the most talked-about divorce cases of the year. This case presents a clear example of financial fraud and marital misconduct. Judge Hendricks began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen every kind of human behavior in her courtroom. Mr. Collins systematically diverted marital assets to support an extramarital relationship while attempting to conceal these activities from his wife. Derek sat slumped at the defendant's table, looking older than his 42 years. Crawford beside him appeared to be going through the motions. clearly aware that they had lost this case the moment Victoria Sterling decided to testify against Derek. The evidence presented shows that Mr. Collins spent approximately $230,000 in marital funds to support Ms. Sterling, including housing, personal expenses, and fraudulent billing to business clients. This represents a clear breach of fiduciary duty and constitutes financial fraud. Judge Hendricks looked directly at Derek. Mr. Collins, your actions demonstrate a calculated attempt to enrich yourself and your paramour at the expense of your wife, who had supported your business during its struggling early years. Your testimony revealed a pattern of deception that goes to the very heart of your character. Elena squeezed my hand under the table. We both knew what was coming. Therefore, the court orders the following. Mr. Collins will immediately return all fraudulently diverted funds, totaling $230,000 plus 12% annual interest, to be paid within 90 days. Mrs. Collins is awarded the marital home, free and clear. Mrs. Collins will receive 75% of all remaining marital assets, including retirement accounts, and Mr. Collins' business interests. Derek's head snapped up at the mention of his business interests. Elena had argued that Derek's construction company was built using my financial support during its early years, making me entitled to a significant ownership stake. Judge Hendricks had agreed. Additionally, Mr. Collins will pay spousal support of $4,000 per month for 5 years and will be responsible for all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Collins in this proceeding. Judge Hendricks paused, looking at Derek with obvious distaste. Mr. Collins, your behavior in this case has been reprehensible. You attempted to defraud your wife while making her believe she was powerless to stop you. The court hopes this judgment serves as a reminder that such conduct will not be tolerated. As the judge's gavel fell, I felt a surge of emotion that took me by surprise. Relief, vindication, and something else. A deep satisfaction that justice had been served. Derek turned to look at me as the courtroom began to empty. His eyes were filled with a mixture of anger and defeat. I hope you're satisfied, Sarah. You've destroyed everything I worked for. I stood up, looking down at this man who had once held such power over my emotions. Derek, I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself the moment you decided to steal from me and lie to my face for 2 years. Elena appeared at my side. Derek, if you have something to say to my sister, you can say it through your attorney. All communication goes through official channels now. As we left the courthouse, Elena and I were surrounded by reporters who had covered the trial. Elena handled their questions with professional grace, while I stayed mostly silent, still processing what had just happened. How does it feel to have won such a significant judgment? One reporter asked. It feels like justice, I replied simply. This was never about revenge. It was about holding someone accountable for their choices and ensuring that I could rebuild my life with dignity. Later that evening, Elena and I sat in my kitchen now, in my house, sharing a bottle of wine and reflecting on everything that had happened. You know what the best part of this whole experience has been? I asked Elena, watching Crawford's face when Judge Hendricks announced the judgment. I laughed. That was pretty satisfying. But no. The best part has been getting my sister back. Elena's eyes softened. Sarah, I owe you an apology. When Dad died and we fought about his estate, I was so focused on the legal technicalities that I forgot about your feelings. I was cold and dismissive, and I hurt you. And I was so emotional that I couldn't see the practical realities of the situation, I replied. We both made mistakes. But we're here now, and that's what matters. Elena raised her wine glass. To new beginnings? To new beginnings. I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. 6 months later, I was walking through the construction site of my new venture, a medical clinic that would provide affordable health care to underserved communities. Derek's business interests had provided me with enough capital to pursue a dream I'd never thought possible, and I was using Victoria Sterling as my interior designer. She had rebuilt her life after the trial, using her experience with Derek as motivation to help other women recognize the signs of financial abuse. Derek had been forced to sell his construction company to pay the court-ordered judgment. The new owners had kept most of his employees, so the collateral damage Crawford had tried to guilt me about never materialized. Derek himself had moved to another state, apparently to start over with whatever resources he had left. I rarely thought about him anymore. The anger and hurt had faded, replaced by a sense of profound gratitude for the journey I had been forced to take. Derek's betrayal had led me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed, and had reconnected me with Elena in ways that were deeper and more meaningful than our relationship had ever been before. As I stood in what would soon be the waiting room of the Collins Community Health Center, I reflected on how much my life had changed. The scared woman who had received Derek's ultimatum in her kitchen was gone forever. In her place stood someone who had learned that she was never as powerless as she had believed. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Dinner tonight? I have news about a case I think you'd be interested in. Another husband trying to hide assets from his wife." I smiled as I typed back, "Absolutely. Should I bring my forensic accounting notes?" Elena's response came immediately. "Bring everything. We have work to do." As I locked up the construction site and headed home, I realized that Derek had been right about one thing. This experience had changed me completely. He just hadn't anticipated that those changes would make me stronger, more confident, and absolutely unwilling to let anyone treat me as less than I deserved ever again. The woman who had once worked overtime to support someone else's dreams now had dreams of her own, and the resources, knowledge, and fierce determination to make them reality. Derek had tried to throw me away like garbage, but instead he had forged me into something unbreakable. His greatest miscalculation hadn't been underestimating my financial resources or my legal representation. It had been underestimating the power of a woman who finally understood her own worth. And that realization, more than any court judgment or financial settlement, was the greatest victory of all.